12:03 or 12:05, we didn't do adjusting your watch, on Wednesday the 10th for the Finance Committee meeting, and board members in the room are Member Holloman and myself, Member Lessons, and online we have President Bellamy and anybody else?
Nope.
No. Can we just go around the room real quickly for the record?
Andrew Ratliff, Chief Financial Officer.
Mike Chadwick, Internal Audit.
Meredith Basteris, Internal Audit.
Jared Bryant, Superintendent.
Katie Parrott, OMB Senior Director. Aurora Copeland, Senior Director of Finance.
Jim Farrington, Treasurer.
Great. So the first item on today's agenda is the internal audit update, and I'm going to turn to Mike for that.
Thank you. Through the chair. A couple days ago, you should have received a draft or a list of suggested audits for and special studies for the upcoming year. If you haven't received that, I can provide it to you now as a reminder. Would you like a copy or?
I'll share it with you. Yes,
I can
thank
give you
you.
another one if you need another one.
That's perfect.
Okay. We do this every year. We sent out a letter several weeks ago to the board and to the administration asking for any ideas of things that they thought might be important things to consider for this upcoming year. These are the ideas that we received. For the most part, there was one or two that I thought, I just don't know how that will fit into what we do, or if that's really an audit. A couple things we have 7 suggested audits. Some of these audits we've done in the past. For example, the addenda audit is one we've done in the past. P-card audit, that's one we do nearly every year, every 18 months or so. That audit, I suspect we may not find a whole lot, but what's nice about that audit is it does let people know that someone is looking. And if you wait, say 3, 4, 5 years, you get a little loosey-goosey. Special activity agreements, that's an audit we did a while back ago, probably around 2014, 13. Equity and student fees, never done that. Security training, internal controls over payroll, and principal discretionary accounts. We also had 2 special studies. One is Pledge of Allegiance in classrooms. Do a survey to see how that's working. Another one is selection and adoption of challenged instructional material. Adequacy of the P&P.
I'm sorry, what's the P&P?
Policy and procedure.
Policy.
I should have spelled that out, sorry. So these are the audit suggestions for the upcoming year. Right now, we are just now wrapping up nearing the end of our fixed asset audit, and we'll be starting the writing of that report here shortly. And so any suggestions, any feedback on these would be appreciated. I don't know, Andy, do you have any thoughts on any of these?
Really, I mean, I was kind of focused on the P cards and the addenda being the ones that I'd kind of like to see done. Those I think we probably have the most risk and exposure on, just given the volume and dollar amounts. The other ones, I maybe talk to kind of what we were thinking on those, like the equity and student fees. That would be more geared towards, like, say we have an art class at Bartlett or East and an art class at South. Is the one at South able to collect fees to have a more robust program than maybe some of the other schools in lower income areas? But just to see if there is sort of that discrepancy there. Security training was one that Jim Anderson had put on there or requested, and that was more along the lines of our schools conducting their required security trainings and doing those with fidelity. And so just to ensure that those are done and documented, and see how to ensure all the schools are doing it, yes. But those are the 2 or 3 that I really kind of had interest in. But then if the board has other ones too, happy to discuss those.
Thank you. I think that members Higgins and Wilson are online, and since they are part of the finance committee, I would invite them to reflect on the possibilities, maybe first. So I don't know if you guys heard all of that, but possible audits include addenda, P cards, special activity agreements, equity and student fees, security training, internal controls over payroll, principal discretionary accounts, and it sounded like recommendations were maybe focused on addenda and P cards. Any thoughts? Members Higgins or Wilson?
And they have the capacity to do maybe 3 or 4 audits a year, so
Okay,
Yeah,
just kind of put
so
that
we
out there
could,
too.
we could choose up to 4.
yeah, up to 4, and then the
Okay.
special studies, those are usually done if for some reason we have downtime between one audit and the next. For example, we may finish what we would call maybe a summer audit, right? And the next audit would start, the next audit would really, we would need school to be in session to do it. So we thought, oh, we have 2 or 3 weeks, we could throw in a special study if you needed to squeeze something in there and use the downtime.
I have one question, we got a briefing last night at our board meeting about security training. And it does seem like there's a pretty intense focus on our safety and security, so I don't know whether an audit would complement or repeat sort of the work that may already be done. So I don't want to duplicate things.
I agree.
So I'm maybe less interested in that, knowing that the team is really focused
Mhm.
on our security situation right now. Like, I feel like we've got that in our sights. I think that, focusing on Dena and P cards. Could you speak a little bit more about the principal discretionary accounts?
Yeah, the principals have these accounts that they can use basically at their discretion.
Mhm.
The thought was that we could go into that and see, well, what are they using those accounts for?
And have we ever conducted an audit on them?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't recall doing that.
Probably not since we had decentralized student activities where they had their own checking accounts. We used to do those audits every year and it was part of, it would be encompassed in there, but that's been since 2000.
3 or 4 years, maybe at least.
17.
Yeah, we probably haven't done audits like 15 or 16 on it, so.
I think that, we have our board goals about reading and math and college career life readiness. So I would be curious about the extent to which those are supporting the board goals.
Yeah, and typically those are, that's money that's raised from, at the high schools, it'd be like vending machine revenues, kind of this non-assigned revenue. And a student activities account, and they're limited up to like $5,000. So there's not a whole lot of exposure on the total amount for schools, but just to understand kind of what that's being used for and recommend any changes in the process.
And could you review the internal controls over payroll, over payroll a little bit more?
Yes, I can do that. We've never done an audit of payroll, so to speak.
Okay.
Internal controls are paid, are time cards being approved appropriately? Is leave being approved appropriately? And being reflected on the time cards appropriately? Those types of things that go into making, is the right wage rate being approved? Or let's say, for example, we pull a sample at a school. And we say, okay, these are the teachers that they have. Here's who was paid from that school. And then we say, who's my gender? It's not reflected on the school, on the school roster. In other words, are there ghost employees? Call us ghost employees. Do we have anything like that? So those types of issues regarding payroll.
I feel like there's value to that. I mean, we know that recruitment and retention are core priorities, and we want the money going towards the most effective. What's the most effective use of the funds that we do have? So an audit there could support transparency and responsible use of funds, then I think that's something that I would support. So I guess, my stars would be on the addenda, P cards, internal controls, and principal discretionary accounts. I don't know if other board members, President Bellamy or Board members Higgins, Holloman, Wilson, do you have any thoughts?
Madam Chair, this is
Yes.
Margot. So the principal discretionary accounts are not, I mean, those are what, that's the only set pot of money where kids can go on field trips if they can't afford it. Some, they for student recognition programs. So I don't know that it's a lot of money.
Mhm.
But I would hate to, I don't know that that we can draw a direct line to our goals and our guardrails. But I do know that it's the way that money is being used is usually to provide to pay for things that kids can't pay for themselves in terms of participating or recognizing kids for the work that they're doing. So, and I don't know if it's a significant amount of money. And I don't even know that every school principal has a discretionary account. I guess that's one of my questions. Do all schools have those accounts, or is it mostly middle and high school where that revenue is generated?
Right, correct. There are a few elementary schools that do have principal accounts, but for the most part, it is secondary, middle and high schools. And again, that account is just, they can only spend $5,000.
Yeah, okay.
And a lot of
All
it's
right.
gonna be, some of them will be recognized for like employee appreciation things we wouldn't
Mhm.
necessarily allow out of general funding. So they have
Yeah,
some other
yeah,
items.
and they do a lot of recognition. So I don't want it to go away, but I do I guess it wouldn't hurt us to know which schools have them and how they're being used. And we might even need to take it one step further and see how we might be able to support that more, given our goals and our guardrails and how we want to empower kids to do better. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be a really wonderful outcome of an audit, is the recognition that perhaps there need to be, slightly more robust principal discretionary accounts based on the needs that principals are recognizing and how they're allocating the funds that they do have. They certainly know their schools the best.
Yeah, and I really think that if we could call it something different, that might help me. That might, because when you hear discretionary funds, I think if we can call it what it's used for, student support funds or something. I don't know what that is, but that might be a different discussion. But the only discretion the principals have is, how are we celebrating? Who are we celebrating? And basically, can we afford to do it? So, but so it's discretionary in terms of the principal's choice to spend, but we do want it focused on in ways that help kids, be successful.
Is it called a principal discretionary account, or is there another? Okay, Aurora's nodding her head.
Yes.
It's called a principal discretionary account. I think we need to call the spade a spade.
So I
But-
didn't make up the name.
Okay. I guess if there's no further dissent, I think it will be illuminating, and there is value to understanding how it's being used. So I see all four of them as helpful and important audits over the next year, if your team agrees.
So what I heard then was P card, addenda, principal accounts, principal discretionary accounts, and payroll. Is that-
And the internal controls over payroll, yeah.
I heard. And then on the special studies, are any of these interest to, is that something you want us to pursue?
I want to say that didn't the administration recently do a survey on the
Survey.
Pledge of Allegiance
We've done a survey, and then I know we've had some legal briefings related to number 2.
in your tenure and briefings on number 2? So I don't see either of them
Okay.
as relevant to the finance committee or I don't know, the
That's
district's
fine.
financial positions. I don't see that helping financial transparency.
We will then not do those,
Okay,
but just to let you know, if someone's interested on number 2, the instructional materials, I did find a very interesting, and maybe not interesting, comprehensive, it appeared to be, PMP regarding the screening of materials from the school district in Utah called the Alpine School District, the largest school district in the state of Utah.
Mhm.
Because I wasn't quite sure what this meant, so I did some searches and I thought, that's pretty interesting. And I could share that perhaps with the superintendent. I could let you have that. Could be useful for something.
Sure.
I mean, I do feel confident that we have a really robust, probably the best in the state, process and administrative regulation for the challenged materials. So that's, I feel good about the process that we have in place.
Well, then we'll go forward with those.
Okay.
Thank you for your support. Can I just leave you with one thought,
Yes,
more of on a light note?
yes.
Since this meeting will be heavy probably, I don't know. But my daughter's an avid reader. She's a civil engineer, just graduated with a master's degree. She likes math. So she was reading a history book about math. And it's probably not something I would read. And this author, I don't know who the author is, said that in the ancient city-state of Ur, which is in ancient Mesopotamia, there was a king named Shulgi. And King Shulgi's accounting system was designed around a surprising principle. It should make it as easy as possible to detect attempts to defraud the state. Auditing, it turns out, is the true cradle of civilization. So-
Amen, amen, amen.
I think that you need a bumper sticker to that effect.
So, on that note, thank you for your support.
Wonderful. Or at least a t-shirt.
We do have a t-shirt that says "Be audit, you can be."
Thank you both.
All right.
Want to share your screen?
I do.
Okay, with that, we're going to pivot towards fund balance projections. So Andy, do one of these.
Okay. All right, so I want to give you guys an update on where we're at with our general fund and transportation fund balances. Last update we did was I think about 2 months ago. So just kind of give you a bird's eye view of where we're at. Don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I do want to go through some of the bigger things that have changed since the last time we reviewed these. Student fees are still about where they were before, still kind of a loss, about 630,000 projected. A lot of that's due to not fewer participants in sports with relation to COVID and not charging parking fees due to having transportation issues. So that was the big thing, but that's about what we projected last time. That really hasn't changed. The interest earnings have gone up by about 2.4 million as far as the variance or the amount we expect to receive since last time. We had a couple of really good months with our insurance or our investment pool. So assuming that stays fairly consistent, we'll exceed our projected budget by about 4.4 million. So that about 2.4 million increase over the last time we shared this. E-rate went up by about 850,000 since the last time we shared this. We got another payment from the Emergency Connectivity Fund that we didn't know if we were going to get, and that was a reimbursement for hardware. And I believe this one was actually specifically tied to Apple lease devices that they were able to pay for some of. So that went up by 850,000. The federal fund or the state funding for the foundation is about 3.2 million higher than the last time. And that's almost entirely due to intensive needs funding. Our original projection was we were going to lose about 20 students from the initial count of 1,083 students. We ended up losing, I think, 6 or 7 students. So a lot more classified than what we were anticipating as kind of a worst case scenario, but that added about 3.2 million. And then there's a little less federal impact aid deducted as we just didn't get as much. So We didn't get as much federal revenue, but the state deducts less when we don't get it. Really no big changes in federal funding sources. The other one you see is that emergency connectivity fund at the bottom, the 2.8 or 2 million. That was there last time. But again, that really is just a reimbursement from other hardware devices too, similar to the E-rate. So overall, in the revenue side, we're about $6.3 million higher than what we had projected in a couple months ago. Any questions on the revenue before we move on?
So, sorry, the intensive needs funding increase, that's part of the foundation funding
Yes, yeah.
that we're seeing on this under state sources.
Yeah, so we had projected, or the original count was, I think, 1,083. We expected about 20 of those to drop out through the state's auditing process, and only 6, I think, or 7 dropped off in the end. So we were able to provide enough documentation to get funding for those.
Okay.
Not a whole lot of changes on the expense side of it. Again, some of the bigger ones you see are that the substitute line item here where it's $7.2 million over budget, primarily because we just can't hire the full-time staff. You see the certificated salaries, 9.4 million variance there, just kind of eating that up. And then the teacher's assistants, about 4.3 million under budget as well, just because we unable to find these people to work for us. And that's kind of pervasive along pretty much every single employment category we have, as we have a lot of vacancies that are creating these positive variances. While it's good for our savings, it's probably not exactly what we want for being able to serve the students. As far as the benefits go, though, we're fairly aligned with what we presented last time. The biggest difference will be in the other benefits. It's about $1.5 million lower expense in that. As we project out how much we're spending in workers' comp, since we're self-insured, we're spending less than what we've accrued through payroll. So we expect to have a balance that we're going to be able to kind of refund back to the accounts that paid it. So what happens is we run our payroll, we apply a percentage, it goes into kind of this holding account to pay our claims. And then when our claims are lower than what we've actually accrued for the year, then we're able to credit that money back. And we expect to have about $1.5 million credit at the end of the year. For next year, we did lower our accrual rate, so we're hoping to kind of squeeze that down and not have that variance in future years. See, the other big ones under the services, the other big kind of driver there, again, the only real big change would be, and it's not even much of a change, just to mention, is that unallocated that shows a $2.9 million negative variance. That's really in recognition that a lot of our charter schools are going to have unspent balance as well, because they have also having trouble hiring folks and will have remaining balances, and that'll come into this unallocated account and get encumbered. But while the budget transfers haven't been made for that, we want to recognize that that expense really is going to be there as just to provide a more accurate number of how much we expect to have at the end of the year. So really on the expense side, there's only about $1 million overall change from our last projection, mostly due to that workers' comp. So in a fairly good spot financially, at least for this. The only other thing I would include, if you look down, scroll down here to this bottom where it has the transfers to or from other funds. This by and large represents an amount that we may have to spend, or one, it is some FEMA revenue that we'd like to transfer back to the capital projects fund, equating about 7 million or 9.5 million. And then we have another, 6 or 7 million in there for health insurance when we need to shore up the district's health insurance fund. So we're projecting out a need for that so we can see kind of a more accurate accounting of what we think our fund balance is really going to be at the end. But that's where that FEMA money and the health insurance money would come in this presentation.
And was that health insurance, was that like 3 point something?
I think at the time, I think it was it was over 3 million when we had, at that point in time. We expect that to grow as the year goes on. But I think we're projecting is $6 to $7, $8 million. But really, it's kind of dependent on the claims that we get for the rest of the year.
Okay.
So we do anticipate having a memo come forward, probably at the next board meeting to help shore up that health insurance fund, so it's not negative.
Great. Any questions from board members, Alderman, or anyone online?
Just a related question. What is our, did you give a projection, enrollment projection yet? Do we have that yet?
We have what we projected originally in our budget, which was an increase of a few hundred students, but we don't have anything updated since then.
Okay, thank you. That's good. That puts it in the right ballpark.
Like from the October count?
This would have been from November, December when we got the demographer's estimates. So as far as our remaining fund balance goes, like I said, we do expect that to grow based on having increased revenues and a little bit lower expense. So kind of moving down to highlight this very last section, the available fund balance above the 8% minimum. This is taking into account the 45 million that we allocated to shore up next year's budget. And when we originally projected this back in November, December, when we were trying to produce the budget, we had this amount above the 8% down to about 0. The last projection we did back in March had it, really 1 to 2 million there. So it's growing a little bit as we kind of get a better handle on what we think our expenses are going to be. One thing, if you noticed over the years, it generally does grow throughout the beginning, from the beginning projection to the end, as it's a lot easier for me to come here and say that, oh, we have a little bit more money than I thought we were going to have versus we're going to have less money. So our initial projections are generally conservative, but so just to kind of keep that in mind is, any iterations of these are going to generally increase unless something catastrophic happens. So we're sitting, all things being equal, by the end of FY24, we would have about $9 million above what we expect, or above the board minimum.
So by the end of FY20.
If we were to, by the end of FY24, if we were able to spend, if we had to spend out the entire 45 million that we approved to carry forward, and no, in our budgeted revenue and budgeted expenditures lined up exactly with what we said, which they probably never will. That's a pretty big target to meet. But that's our general fund. If you have any questions on that.
And Member Jacobs has just joined us as well. Any board member questions on where we stand? I guess, given the growth of the fund balance over the past few months, does the administration feel as though we would be able to use some of that to mitigate the PTR increase for FY24?
And by mitigate,
I mean, like walk back. I mean, if the fund balance projection is above the 8% minimum by $8.8 million, is that, are those funds that we would want to walk back the PTR or save because the rainier day is still coming?
yeah, I mean, my thought on that is that we're headed into a structural deficit in the next couple of years, and the PTR increase, while difficult, it was really the only structural change that we made that'll help alleviate that. So I would want to know what's happening in the legislature. I would want to know the forecast for 2 years. And I would really want to have that conversation on PTR for FY25, just because when the board passed the budget in February, we initiated the process of giving teachers first pick on where they want to land next. So the train really has left the station. And if we were to walk back the PTR increase, we'd essentially create quite a few open positions that wouldn't be staffed in July.
Whereas you actually have plans in place to do that staffing
because we want to give teachers time to figure out where they fit in the organization. So those positions that they were in, were closed, to open them would be a vacancy.
Yeah, so for pupil transportation, on the revenue, we're expecting a little less, about 240,000 less in revenue. And I think we've received all the revenue from the state that we are due so far, or all the payments that we need. So that ought to be fairly accurate. And that's just having a lower brick and mortar ADM versus, we did have an increase in ADM overall. A lot of that increase was at correspondence schools though. So as that went up, there was a little bit of decline in the brick and mortar compared to our projections. So that's why the actual state money is a little bit lower. For the expenditures, there's some that are going to be a little bit all over the place on this one. It's so I was looking through like the bus drivers, for instance, that $600,000 negative is reflective of the wage increases that we were able to provide this year for their contract. So you'll see that the attendance, we still have a lot of trouble filling those. So those remain vacant. And then the other part of this is leave, added duty, and extra help, and also recruitment and retention. So you see that one negative, that's trying to get people hired, and then also paying folks to help to run these extra routes because we just don't have enough drivers to do it normally. So overall, we're anticipating about 620,000 lower on salaries. On benefits, medical, that's the same thing as when we don't have folks employed, we just have savings on the medicals, or folks waive insurance, we have savings there. But the TERS and the other benefits are fairly well aligned with the salaries being over. The other kind of big ones would be the contracted transportation, about $2 million in savings there compared to our budget, primarily due to just routes not being run and us not paying for those routes when Reliant didn't have the drivers either. The transfer for field trips, this is money that we get from other funds within the district. So if a school takes ASD bus to a field trip, they'll pay us and pay the transportation program back an hourly rate for the cost of the driver and the fuel. As we didn't have those drivers for activities a lot, we were having to use other outside busing, which doesn't flow through here. So you'll see we just didn't collect as much back because we didn't have as many drivers as we wanted, I guess. The other big line item on that is down here in the equipment line item. And this is a projection based on kind of what we want to do with TransFinder and kind of the routing software that we want. This will be equipping our buses with some sort of device so substitutes and new drivers can have turn-by-turn directions and see who's supposed to be getting on and off these stops versus a piece of paper. So really a more integrated thing to help better track students getting on and off, and then have more direction for our subs and new drivers coming on. I think it'll improve our transportation program quite a bit, but that's what that line item is. It's about 400,000. I just plugged in there as a holding for it.
It's an anecdote, but I was a couple weeks ago driving to school, and there was a bus that I was supposed to turn up my street, and I saw the driver's face do an O, like, oh, I just went by at 45 miles an hour and should have turned left there. And I thought, yeah, you're going to be circling around to come back up. But if they have a paper by paper and they're a substitute, then that's totally understandable that they would miss the turn. So I think that seems like a really important investment.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be very helpful in making sure we get the kids where they need to go.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day on that, we anticipate having about 3.7 million here in the ending fund balance. About 650,000 of that is going to be dedicated towards the projects like this TransFinder. So about 3 million or so remaining in there, of which we plan to spend, or we have in our budget for next year, 2.5 million. So we'll be able to spend most of that down next year unless we get some additional state funding and transportation.
Okay. Great, thank you very much. Any additional questions online? Seeing none, good time to pivot to item 3, which is legislative update, which may also include a transportation component, but I'll let you continue.
Okay. So the big ones we saw moving through was Senate Bill 52 was going through there. They amended that to include an extra $50 in transportation funding. That would generate a little over $2 million for the district. I believe they did they put that into the 680 into actual BSA through there now too?
But with no inflationary component for FY 25, right?
Yeah, I believe it was a one-time increase. And that would have generated roughly 50 million for us.
For FY 24.
For FY 20, yes. And hopefully that stays in the BSA so we can plan on having it the following year. That's the biggest thing we're seeing now is if it's one-time money, then we're in the same position where do we save this in the event or we can start allocating it to some of the higher value projects? And then just see maybe keep our savings for a little while longer and to be able to show up a couple of years of budgets that way. There's a couple other correspondence study program bills going through HB 139 and HB 165. The House has 2 correspondence funding bills going through. One of them, I believe, would have just provided a multiplier from a 90% multiplier for correspondence students to 21.5 or 21.5% increase over their base would go from a 0.9 to a 1.215 multiplier. And that's in line with special education and CTE adjustments in the foundation formula currently. The issue with that though is for like a school like West High where we have a school size adjustment that goes below 1. We actually get an effective multiplier of about 1.14 or so for West High students. So we get more money per student for correspondence than we do for those big comprehensive high schools that are providing all these activities and sports for the schools. HB 165 was similar in that I think they originally had a multiplier of like 1.5 on it. So a really substantial increase for that. I think they've come down on that by a little bit, but they also had a provision in there where I believe the state could insert a statewide correspondence program into a district. So there was some strange language in there, but I'm just kind of tracking if they're going to go forward with one or both of those, they're kind of conflicting in their language.
And in either of those, are there provisions that allow for districts to recover administrative costs affiliated
I
with?
believe one of them specifically disallowed it and said that money had to go all to allotment. I think the other one, I think 139 was probably didn't have that provision. All right.
Do you have this is a separate item, thinking about the cost of administration. With the bill, maybe House Bill 106, is that the correct one that would allow for funding directly from the state teachers, right? 5,000, 10,000, 15,000. Districts would have to verify teachers' eligibility. But this is like kind of a nuts and bolts question, but how much time is money, how much time would that cost the district? Is that a full-time position? Is that somebody working really hard all throughout the month of June? I mean,
I'm not really sure because the way it was written seemed like the state was paying that directly and the
to
teachers.
teachers, but the districts would have to
apply on behalf of
confirm
the teachers.
that teacher's eligibility. So I'm just envisioning with 3,000 AEA members, somebody going through a lot of paper.
Yeah, I would need to remind myself of what the eligibility criteria is, because it would also be for people that we bring in, right, from other districts potentially out of state. I'm assuming they would be eligible, so then we need to verify that after they're hired. So it does seem like quite a logistical piece for HR departments.
Right,
Yeah.
it would be a cost to our HR
Yeah,
department
depending
in
on
some
what kind of
fashion.
verification they need, if they just need a list of all of our teachers. But, I mean, that one was kind of strange in the way it was written, because it would become, the state would be becoming the payroll agent, and it sounded like they issue the state would issue those payments directly to teachers. So they would now be getting another W-2 from the
Steve,
state of Alaska. And they would be processing all payroll for it. Unless they're gonna try to push that off on the districts.
Maybe they just earmark it for us and it's required to use for the stipends and then we need to pay it
Or
out.
come through as a grant.
I mean, it's not unprecedented. We do those types of incentives for our staff now. It's just that with the money coming from the state, I don't know if Alaska's done something like that where they earmark a specific thing for districts. In Texas, we do it and I know how it works there, but I don't know if we
Yeah, I
have
don't I
infrastructure.
think we've ever done that before.
I'd be curious about, what's the cost of administering that? It's just helpful to share with legislators who are discussing these bills. Because time is money, and if we're trying to have an efficient administration, cutting into that efficiency is going to cut into student services at the end of the day. And I'd rather an extra $150,000 go towards, a classroom. If that's what it costs us.
Yeah, we'd have to see.
Okay, any other questions about legislative update? Nope, okay, then let's pivot to FY '24, which we've touched on a little bit. I feel like there was a specific question that I wanted to ask about this. I guess the short end of the story is that we have a balanced budget for FY '24, but we don't know what's happening in Juneau. Therefore, we don't know what we might be able to maintain in our fund balance versus.
Yeah, I mean, right now, our budget for '24 is based on the worst case scenario that we get nothing from Juneau. So in the event we get something, whether it's one-time funds or in the BSA, then we'd have to come back to the board and go back and see what we want to do with that money.
I know what part of this question was. I have in my notes from an earlier discussion that if there is no budget passed very soon, that what are the implications for ASD sending out pink slips to teachers? Is that something that we're going to have to do
For FY '24,
for FY '24?
pass the balanced budget.
But if the state doesn't have a budget, does that impact ASD in any way?
Well, the state, I mean, the deadlines for pink slips is May 14th, or probably 12th or 13th this year, based on the weekend. For tenured, and then the last day of school for non-tenured. But I don't know that we want to send out pink slips just on the basis that the state hadn't done that yet, because they'll do special sessions. So if we get into July and August and the state's not making foundation payments, then we're gonna have a problem, but everyone's already under contract at that point. Hopefully we don't get to that point. I suspect they'll have a balanced budget.
And that's why it's good to have a fund balance in case
Right,
something happens
yes.
at the state level to where we can be afloat. That's exactly
Yeah.
why we have that.
Okay,
We would end up floating it for a
so
few months.
you
to figure
don't
out.
anticipate us needing to issue pink slips at this point in time because we don't yet have a budget from the state? That's
No,
okay.
I don't think we would want to.
I mean,
disrupt our
I
staff
realize it
that
would cause
much.
chaos,
Yes.
but I just thought I would ask whether there's something needs to happen in the next 48 hours.
No, I can't imagine we'd want to go out and put on pink slips for.
Okay, but if there is no budget for a period of weeks stretching into months and our fund balance can't cover that, we can't float it, then that's when things would become problematic.
Yeah, and I expect we'd be able to weather it longer than just about a lot of the other districts. So,
I mean, but the budget's all encompassing, like all social services and a lot of
Yeah,
things.
like the state shuts down
That's a
at that
state
point.
shutdown
Yeah.
essentially,
Okay.
so that.
they don't use any by
unprecedented.
July, they're starting to shut down.
Um,
All right, so we don't expect to issue pink slips in the next week. Okay, great. Good news.
Historically, that was just done in order to have flexibility on staffing in the fall.
Okay.
I don't know if you're aware, but ASD used to pink slip all non-tenured teachers every year, just as a routine thing.
Keep on their toes.
Well, that's not a best practice, so.
It really did a lot for some.
Member Jacobs, I think your hand was up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to pull us back from the ledge just a tiny bit and mention that in the probably the more likely scenario that the House and Senate are able to get a budget passed before the 121st day and they leave town. I think the dates align as such that we'll have our next board meeting and our last board meeting this month on the 23rd, just after session ends, and in coordination with administration and President Bellamy, I believe there's going to be space in a work session potentially for an update and a recap from Juneau as to what happened. So probably an item that's relevant for those last 2 points on our Finance Committee agenda for today.
Great, thank you for that. I appreciate doing that. Okay, anything else for this afternoon's meeting? I will say that Amanda shared that there's a conflict with the June Finance Committee meeting with staff. And so tentatively, we're thinking about pivoting to 1 p.m. on the 13th, which would be a Tuesday, rather than Wednesday,
All of cabinet.
the
will be
14th.
in that. The council. No, the Council of Great City
Oh, that's
Schools
right.
training's on the 14th, so no, none of cabinet would be available for, so that's why we moved it.
And I think at that point, we'll talk with members. I guess the Finance Committee is remaining the same with members Wilson and Higgins. And we'll check in with maybe calendaring out all of next year.
Yeah,
That seems like a good idea.
Okay.
It looks like member Higgins has some.
Oh, okay, member Higgins, yes.
Is it me?
Yep.
I just want to mention one thing because I'm going to submit some requests with this and I'll share it beforehand. When I heard the response on some of the liability exposures on group health insurance and what we self-insure and what we don't, it raised a lot of questions to me as to what the potential liability is for our what we have under our insurance. And so I'm going to ask some questions in regards to that. I'll go ahead and submit that for review, but I think it's a finance question when you've got large individual without the kind of stop gaps that I'm familiar with. I'm just concerned about because we've got a limited we're all within the same city. There's no risk sharing or anything else. So this type of liability seems to be very high. And so I'm going to ask some questions about that. And perhaps that might come up again for a Finance Committee meeting at some point.
Okay, great. Well, we can talk further and pursue that in the future. All right. Well, with that, thank you all for sharing your noon hour, and I guess we'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll move
To adjourn.
I'm not really
All right. Thank you, Member Higgins and Member Holloman. I think